welcome you all to our next online PD, Facebook Live. We're going to talk Google Classroom today. So I'm happy to be here with some of my digital learning compadres to start talking about Google Classroom. We can introduce ourselves. I'm Beth Swans and happy to chat today.
And hi, everybody. I'm Lynn Kleinmeyer. Glad to be back with you.
And Corey Rogers is here too.
Corey has to find her microphone. And I'm Corey Rogers, back again today. So it's nice to have people joining us again.
So we're getting ourselves started to talk about Google Classroom, one of our favorite googly products. And we want to just share about how we've been using it a little bit and some of the reasons we have a lot of love for it. One of the things that would help us is if you're joining us today, if in the chat you'd let us know what your role is, if you are a teacher librarian, an administrator, and if you are a parent in this time of teaching at home, Lynn is going to share how she's using Google Classroom at home as well. It's not just a product for schools, it's for everywhere. So we're excited to get started. And I'll turn it over to Lynn. Well, I guess we should talk about why we want to share this maybe a little bit more. So we've been our team has built a process sort of for how to move online. And some of the things that we talk about is how important it is to create a home base, a place where students and the teacher know, here's where we're gathering, here's where the starting point is online, and parents also. And so it's really a way to establish some connections. And we call that our first phase of this online learning. And we feel like Google Classroom does a fantastic job with this. It really creates that home base. It is a way to deliver the content at the same time as encouraging some collaboration and communication. But more than anything, we're going to show you about how we're using it as a home base and a place to really connect with our students.
Yeah, I often jokingly say that I have googly eyes for Google Classroom. I've used it in a multitude of different entry points as a classroom teacher, as a teacher librarian. Currently, as a digital learning consultant, I use it to deliver professional learning opportunities for some of the districts that I work with. And then, as Beth mentioned, because my children are very used to being my guinea pigs, for lack of a better term, they help me experiment with different things. We have a Google Classroom that we've been using here at home. It was just kind of something that we already had established. And so it kind of came in handy and I was able to roll it over for them. So Corey, I know you have used Google Classroom quite a bit too. In what capacities?
I have used Google Classroom to facilitate professional development about learning how to use Google Classroom, a real Russian doll scenario. But I really like doing it because it allowed me to model for teachers ways that they could use Google Classroom. And then kind of collectively, when we came up against some barriers or some struggles, we could problem solve together within our own learning environment. And then as the teachers were implementing with their own kids, they'd have experience to see me struggle and figure it out so that they felt like, oh, hey, this is okay. I can figure this out and move on. And like both of you were saying, it gave me a really nice home base. So all of the learning that we were doing together, because I'd see them like every couple weeks because of PD schedules, we had a place to come back together and land. And if lots of questions were coming into me when I wasn't able to see those teachers, I could push out resources or responses to them without actually seeing them face to face, which is kind of where we're at right now, but allowed us all to feel connected and to have that home base to come back to.
So I'll just add, one of my favorite things about Google Classroom is it keeps changing and growing and evolving. The first time that I demonstrated it with teachers was way back when it was brand new. And it's kind of amazing to me to see how responsive Google has been to the requests of teachers. So that's one of my other favorites about this product. It's not static. It keeps moving itself into what we're asking for. I think that makes it really an exciting product, an exciting thing to use with your classroom.
So today with our conversation, we are going to be really talking about how we are using this as a way to deliver content and to really provide some opportunities not only for students to engage, but also with the content, but also to engage with each other. Um, we know that there's a variety of different entry points to this conversation. So Corey, do you want to kind of talk about where people might be able to find information? I'm going to slowly but surely share my screen.
That would be great. So the first thing that you would do is navigate over to classroom.google.com to open that up. Lynn will show you in a second. But if you're brand new, if you're joining us because you're kind of like, I don't know what this Google Classroom thing is all about, but these ladies seem to love it. What our team has done is we've created a Google Handbook so that you can see the shortened link on Lynn's screen. And so if you scroll down a little bit, we've got lots of different Google products, and these are all getting started guides for teachers to be self-paced. But we have one for Google Classroom that Lynn's highlighting for you. So if you are brand new to this, we want to encourage you to go to the Google Classroom Handbook. I will throw some links in to our chat as soon as I'm done talking. And we think this is a great place for you to get started. So at the top, you've got I can statements. So you would start with, I can create a new classroom. And what that does in the Google Handbook is it walks you through with some step-by-step directions. There's images that kind of show you what it will look like. And then on the right-hand side in that last column, what we've tried to do is give you a reason why. Why is it important that I use this? Or to give you some context about what you would be doing with that step. And so there's lots of steps involved in terms of setting up a classroom, getting students added, getting co-teachers added if that's appropriate. For today, we're going to assume that you've kind of got the baseline. You might have a Google Classroom working, and then we're going to show you some tips and tricks to kind of get that home base really cooking. So if you're not there yet, you might want to pause this, go through that handbook a little bit, and then rejoin us once you kind of have that foundation there. But we're going to assume for our 30 minutes together that you've at least got a classroom started.
So as Corey said, navigating your way to Google Classroom, there's a couple different ways that you can navigate, typing in classroom.google.com or using your Google App Launcher. You can kind of navigate your way there as well. As Corey said, we're not going to go through the how to set up. I'm going to take you into the Google Classroom that I have set up here at home and show you a couple of my favorite features. So when you go into your Google Classroom, just a quick tour for those who, once again, may not be 100% familiar. When you click on your Google Classroom, the first place that you go in is your stream. The stream is your landing page within Google Classroom, and this is where you can share announcements with your students, share important information that they need to know. One of the other features of the stream that I want to point out, this is a new integration. As Beth was talking about, Google Classroom is constantly evolving and updating to meet the needs of its users. And they recognize that a lot of people were using Google Meet as a way to have some virtual connections, that face-to-face connection. And so a recent update is that they actually have a Google Meet integration for your students. So right here, you can see that there's the Meet link. It's just one less place that your kids have to go. So once again, kind of that home base, that one-stop shop. We're going to spend a bulk of our time here in this classwork piece, but highlighting the other two features. Under people, I'm not going to click on it just because the only two people in this classroom are my own children and protecting their privacy just a little bit. If I were to click on that tab, you would see that I am actually able to add co-teachers to this classroom. So that's really fantastic. As a librarian, I was a co-teacher in almost every single Google Classroom across my entire building, which allowed me to help support and share information, create assignments, share resources for all of my teachers, and also to support my students as they were interacting. It was just great to have that insight.
Lynn, can I add there? I think that this is like the most wonderful thing for special ed folks and all the or gifted and talented folks, because you can actually see what's going on in classrooms from the class view, which is an amazing addition. At this point, as we're sharing online, it's also a way for different staff to see what's going on in different people's online world, which I think is another really big plus.
Yeah, just that ability to have some collaboration and enhance those lines of communication. So with this people tab, to have people join, you do have the option of a class code, which right now may not be the most succinct way to add students to your classroom. Under the people tab, you can also add either your teachers or your students via email. The final tab, once again, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time with this today, but there is a component within Google Classroom where you can provide grades, assessments. And that looks a couple different ways. There's a rubric feature that allows you to provide some feedback. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time with this right now because here in Iowa, most of our school districts have gone the voluntary route with their continuous learning plans, which does allow for feedback, but not the assessment grading portion. And honestly, we have roughly 30 minutes together today. So we're going to kind of narrow our focus just a little bit. So I'm going to navigate myself now to the classwork tab. The classwork is where you are actually sharing your content, delivering content to your students. So with this, there's a couple really fantastic ways to go about sharing content. So when I click on this create button, you'll see that I have a menu of options. There's several of these that we're going to focus on today. I just kind of want to highlight a couple that we're going to skip over. The quiz assignment one, I'm not going to spend time with today because once again, that's kind of the assessment piece. I would encourage you to definitely explore it. But for our time together today, I'm just going to highlight what that's about just so that you know. The other one I'm not going to spend too much time on is this reuse post. That's actually a really handy feature. If you have more than one Google Classroom, like I do, you can actually reuse any of your posts, whether it's an assignment, quiz, question, material from another Google Classroom, even an archived classroom. So a classroom that you are no longer using. That's really great because it totally streamlines things and you're not reinventing the wheel. You can pull from things that you've already done previously. We're going to spend a bulk of our time with the 3 assignment, question, and material options, which are really about delivering content. So I'm going to start with material, actually. When you use the material option, basically you are just sharing a resource, a link, a video. You're sharing a resource that you're asking your students to consume, but you're not asking them to engage in anything. I'm going to skip over actually clicking on it because it looks very similar to an assignment. The only difference is, once again, you're not asking your students to engage in any way. You are just pushing out information. You're delivering that content. As Beth referenced, when we put together the Digital Learning Team's Continuous Learning Guide, we realized that different districts, different teachers were going to have different entry points to this conversation. So using Google Classroom as a home base just to share content and to be your landing page as a way to connect is great. That's what the material piece is about. But once you start to shift that just a little bit, and it's more about asking your students to engage with the content and to have some collaboration, some communication options, and to kind of enhance their learning, that's where these other features come in handy. So I'm going to start with the assignment. So when I click on assignment, I am forced to give it a title because nothing else will work unless you do that. So with your title, whatever your context is that you're wanting your students to know what this resource or what this assignment's all about. You'll notice that instructions are optional, but they are very, very handy to give your students some context. That is one of the pieces with the voluntary plan, is that we're being asked to provide a little bit of scaffolding or support for your students to know what the resources that you're sharing are all about, maybe how to use them and navigate. The instruction piece is a great place to put that. What I really love about the assignment is that you get to right here under add in multiple resources to have your students engage with some content. You can pull things from your Google Drive. You can add a link. You can add a file. You can even add in a YouTube video. Now, There are a couple different ways to go about adding content to Google Classroom. You'll notice across the top of my Chrome browser, I have the extension right here that's shared a classroom. That's a great way if I'm not already in Classroom. If I happen to come across a website that I was like, oh, this is going to be great information, this link I want to be able to share, you can use that extension to share very quickly to your classroom. Because I'm not sure that everybody has that installed yet, I'm going to actually show you the other way, which is to have your website. For example, I'm just going to use Wonderopolis as an example. And just to simply copy, and then under the link, go ahead and paste that in and add the link. And you'll notice that I can, that it shows up right there. It's got that nice visual component to it. I can add other resources as well. So I can layer this in for my students. So it doesn't have to just be the link. It can be a link, it can be a video, there's multiple pieces of information that you can share with your students simultaneously. So once again, it's about streamlining everything for kids in this home base. One of the features that I appreciate is the Google Drive. You can pull documents that you want your students to use. But I don't know if some of you have seen this. One of the newest features is this idea of being able to create a resource right off of this page, as opposed to having to create it beforehand. So I can actually create for my students docs, slides, sheets, drawings, or forms right from this page. So creating a document is pretty quick and easy. I just create it, and what it will do is it will pop up a window for me where I can create whatever interaction I want my students to have. Because once again, the difference between an assignment and the materials is truly the level of engagement that you're asking your students. You're asking them to actually do something with the content that they're learning. So I'll just do this as an example. And I would maybe want to put in like something actually for them to engage or interact with. Maybe this is a hyperdoc. Maybe this is a reflection piece. Lots of different options here. But one of the things that I appreciate too is that you'll notice when I create this document, I have this little window that pops up. I have 3 different choices. Students can just view the file, so they can just consume it. Or if I want to shift it so that they're actually, once again, interacting with the content and making their own meaning and demonstrating what they're understanding, I can change it so that my students can edit a file, which is really nice when you're doing group work kind of things where you're wanting the whole class to interact. Or I can make a copy for each student. When I click on make a copy for each student, the wonderful thing is they get their own individual copy that actually already has their name attached to it when they open it up, and I already have access to it. So gone are the days of having to worry about students sharing things back with me, especially right now. It's just a real succinct way for you to streamline communication with your students and actually kind of get that general understanding of what it is that they are understanding. So over on the right side, you'll also see that I have a couple different options here. I can choose which classroom I'm assigning things to. So actually I can do multiple classrooms in one place if I need to. I also, once again, I'm not going to click on this because the only students in here are my own kiddos, but I can actually, under this assigning to all students, I could do this for every single one of the kids that are in my class or interacting with my content. Or I can click on that menu and I can select just specific students that I want to share a resource with. So once again, circling back to knowing your learners and maybe differentiating your learning as we're kind of thinking about the opportunities that we have right now to really personalize some learning for kids, to create some collaboration experiences with kids, that portion is super helpful and handy because we can just push content to certain kids who may need it or who we want to engage with in a very structured way. The points piece down here, you can have things ungraded. So once again, in this time where it's voluntary, that would be an option to take off the points that you don't have to have anything tied to it as far as a grade. Same thing with due dates. You can have timelines for students that you would like them to engage with content, or you can leave that off. Now the topic piece, I'm going to circle back to, but with the topic, it's an organization piece. I can assign a topic right here, or I can create a new one. I'll just go ahead and put this under free exploration. And this rubric piece, I'm just sharing it within Google Classroom. You can create rubrics in order to include feedback, but once again, for our purposes today, we're not focusing on that portion. So I get everything ready to go, and then now's the time where I'm sharing it with my kiddos. So you'll notice the final piece is up across the top. I have an assign button. If I've got this ready to go and I'm ready to share it with my students right now and have them have access to it, wonderful. I can assign it and it will be pushed to them immediately. Or you'll notice there's this lovely down arrow. I can schedule things for when I want them released to students. If I have a little bit of planning time and preparation time, I can go ahead and I can get everything ready to go. And then I can push it out to my students in a timely fashion so that I'm not inundating them with everything all at once. I can be really intentional about my release of activities. Or if I'm not ready for any of that, I can also save it as a draft, which is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and assign it. And what it will do once it's thinking and contemplating about actually going forward, it will then share it to the appropriate topic. Now I'm going to highlight topics really quick.
Hey, Lynn,
you'll notice
before you do that, I think it'd be a great time to invite people in the chat to kind of share with us, how are you using assignments? So what are some tips and tricks that you have? The chat's awfully quiet. And we know that we're not the only people with experience with Google Classroom. And so we would love if you've got a tip or a trick that you use, if you'd share that in the chat so that we can share that with everybody. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, and we would love to hear what you're doing in terms of what types of things you're sharing with your students, how you're asking them to engage. Have any of you used some of the group work kind of features to allow collaboration, virtually amongst kids working on some sort of project together? Yeah, we would definitely love to hear from you, because I feel like I've been talking for a really long time. So I would love to hear from others as well. As we're kind of waiting for the chat, just real quick with the topics. Topics, once again, are just that organizational feature. You'll notice along the left-hand side, topics just help organize content. This can be super handy if you are in an elementary setting to group your resources that you're sharing by content. As a secondary teacher, you might want to think about, grouping by standard or particular topic, the content topic. But what's really nice is then it coordinates it and organizes it for your students. Also, another feature that I really appreciate about the topics is you can now rearrange them. So if I didn't want my children go to Benton, but if I didn't want that to be the first thing that they see, I can reorder them. So that's really handy. So Corey and Beth, as I've shared just this assignment piece, any insights or feedback from you, or is there anything kind of popping up in the chat right now?
We have a question in the chat. So Hector is saying that they're new to using Google Classroom, and this is all great, excellent, but would like to see how to make it more interactive.
Nice. Okay, so one of the pieces that would be really helpful in making things a little bit more interactive is actually having students to be able to engage with, because part of the real power of Google Classroom as far as that communication piece is being able to have the assignment actually go to a student and be able to click on it, and you can provide them feedback in real time. You can engage with them and interact. Another feature that is great about Google Classroom is that you can actually, underneath assignments, you can turn on commenting. and kids can ask questions, they can interact with. But I'm wondering if our next feature that we're going to highlight might actually fit the bill of what you're asking for in terms of the interaction. Because a lot of this really has been a little bit more about the consumption of information. But really the power of Google Classroom is, like you just said, that the ability to engage and interact and actually have a feedback loop, a communication loop going. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the question feature. Does that sound okay, Corey and Beth? Okay. So with
So
the
Lynn, can I just, we're about 5 to 10 minutes before we need to be done. So just to keep the time on track.
perfect, because this is kind of my last one that I'm going to highlight for today. But under question, I can obviously pose a question. It's aptly named. I can type in a question like, what are you enjoying about this webinar? And you'll notice over here on the side, it can be a short answer question or it can be a multiple choice. So once again, this is a great feedback tool for you as an instructor, but right now it might be a great way to open up conversation with students. So maybe having it be as a short answer feature might actually help it be a little bit more engaging for students. Once again, you'll notice that you're going to see a lot of the same features. You can add additional content. So perhaps you could add a video that you wanted your students to watch and reflect on. You can have some sort of interaction in terms of like assigning a Google Drawing or something like that for them to do some sort of reaction to as part of their question answer. Along the right-hand side, you're going to see a lot of the same features, but down here, you're going to notice there's an option here where students can reply to each other. Now, obviously, as a teacher, you can toggle that on or off, depending on whether or not you want that interaction. But especially right now, if you are trying to provide an opportunity for your students to interact with, engage with each other in conversation, that might be a really great way to scaffold some communication with your kids. One of the things that it does is it does require your students to answer the question for themselves before they see what their classmates have answered, which is kind of fantastic. And they can see each other's answers, and then they can engage in a conversation and reply back and forth to each other. So once again, you have the same pieces where you can ask it right now and push it to your students. You can schedule it, save it as a draft. You can also click on the button of having students edit their answer in order to maybe have them change their reflection or change their answer after a bit of reflection, or deepening their understanding, or wanting to add more context after seeing what their classmates have done and wanting to interact with them. So with that, here's the thing. This was just kind of a first glance at some of the power of Google Classroom. There's so much more that you can do, but this was just kind of that introduction to really thinking about how can you use Google Classroom as your home base to make connections with your students, to allow them to make connections with each other, and how to deliver some content. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop with my screen sharing. And I would love to hear if there's any additional questions or comments.
One of the things that I love about Google Classroom is the sharing features between Google Docs and all the other Google products are always an issue, making sure that who has permission and all that sort of process. And Google Classroom takes all of that guesswork away. I think that that makes it be a really easy entry point for people that are maybe have not used Google a whole lot in their classroom. Google Classroom, I didn't mean to say Google Classroom there, but in your class, you've not used the Googles. And this is a way to kind of get started because it makes all of that permission stuff so much easier.
Okay, so Hector, first of all, shout out to Hector for interacting with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hector asked, if you have multiple class periods, is there a way to copy paste assignments across multiple classes? Yes, there is. And Lynn touched on them a little. It's a lifesaver, especially like I was a middle school teacher. So I had 3 sections of my 6th grade elective and 2 sections of my 7th and 8th, and I didn't want to have to recreate that stuff. When you're in classroom, when you're on the classwork tab, when you go to that big blue create button where Lynn was showing you how to make assignments or materials, there's also an option to reuse a post, and it's got 2 little arrows. And so what you can do then is choose the post you want to reuse and then choose which classroom it's going to. So if you make the post for first hour and you need to, thanks Lynn, if you make the post for first hour, but you really need to use it again for 3rd and 5th, maybe with a minor tweak, that's how you can do it. It's a huge time saver.
Yeah, and Hector, I'll toggle back to that screen that she was talking about. There are other place, if it's going to be pretty much the exact same assignment and you don't need to make any changes, right here before you assign your question or your assignment or your material, it says for, and you can click on it, and I can actually click right here the other classrooms I want to assign this to right away. However, like Corey was saying, let me toggle back here. If it's something where I don't want it to be pushed to my students right away because I need to make some slight changes, I would go ahead and get it prepared in the classroom, my first classroom that I'm going to use it in. And then as Corey was saying, this reuse post, I can pull it up from a previous class and make some edits and some changes there. So there's 2 different ways to go about that. But yeah, it's a lifesaver so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single class that you're teaching, that you can use it as at least a starting point.
Too many screens. So Kelly from Cedar Rapids Schools just said she loved the opportunity to learn. So thanks for joining us, Kelly. We love the
Thank you,
opportunity
Kelly.
to help always.
This is not a this is not the world we're living in right now with Google Classroom Plus, but I remember very clearly having a conversation with a middle school student after his teacher started using Google Classroom. And he said for the first time, he didn't have any late assignments because he constantly lost stuff in his locker. And there was no place to lose stuff anymore because it's all inside of Google Classroom. So I feel like this is the organizational tool some of our students are longing for, who have a hard time keeping their ducks in a row, as we said to begin with this whole process. I also feel like it provides that for teachers. For us that have lots of things going on at the same time, it's also a home base for us because you're doing the same process over and over instead of all these multiple places that you could find. So it's really that organizational hub that can make your online life so much more streamlined. And we are probably closing close to the end of our time together. Any closing comments, ladies? Any digital Google Classroom bliss to share yet at the end here?
Just know I said it at the beginning, I am googly-eyed for Google Classroom. I really think everything that you just hit on, Beth, is exactly right. It's about streamlining and providing not only the platform to deliver content, but really to allow students to engage with the content and engage with each other.
Yeah. I feel like lately I just want to remind people to wash their hands. I feel like that's always a good thing. And I think, yes. And I think the other thing we haven't said today, but I feel like our team has said a lot, is to give yourself some grace. So if this is really new to you, give yourself the time and try one thing. Post a question and see how the kids do. And then once you guys are all comfortable with that, post materials. But give yourself grace and give yourself time and maybe take some small steps. If you decide this is what you want to use for home base, that's great. But take it slow and be patient with yourself as well as with the students. And I guess knowing that the digital learning team is here to help you. So that's part of our role. I'm going to throw our digital learning team website into the chat, which is where you can find us and ask for help. And then we want to remind you that our digital learning team all week is hosting some webinars to help you get going with online learning. So tomorrow, our colleagues, Beth, so Beth's going to be back, I think Gina and Mindy.
Mhm.
Yes, got it. They are going to be back on Facebook Live tomorrow, April 16th. Gosh, I hope that date is right.
Yes.
But at 1:15, and they are going to share all about Google Slides, collaborative tips. Beth, do you want to give a little preview?
Just we're really taking Google Slides to a different level. I think it's beyond presentation, and how can it really be used with students as a collaboration tool. So some different ways of thinking about Google Slides. I mean, that's what we hope. It's Google Slides. I like Google Classroom, but my heart is really in love with Google Slides. So I'm super excited to share that tomorrow.
So Hector, that might be a great way. You could app smash Classroom with slides to get kids interacting and collaborating.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, well then I think maybe it's time for us to wrap it up. Thanks, ladies. It was fun to get to join you live on Facebook.
Yes,
Thank
exactly.
you so much for those of you who did join us live.
Yes.
Yes, we're glad to have you.